Racist judge forces a pregnant black woman to do push-ups. Unaware. Her husband is a powerful senator. The courtroom was silent, too silent. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made your skin prickle. At the front of the room, Judge Raymond Calloway adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, his cold eyes fixed on the young woman standing before him. His expression was one of quiet authority, but there was something else behind it, something darker. Mia Carter, a 28-year-old woman in her third trimester, stood with her hands gently resting on her swollen belly. She wasn't just tired, she was exhausted. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and every muscle in her body begged for rest. But she stood tall, her face calm, refusing to let the judge see the weariness creeping through her bones. She wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. Her crime, a minor traffic violation, a broken taillight, something that should have been a routine ticket, had somehow turned into this, a humiliating display of power. Judge Calloway cleared his throat, tapping his gavel lightly against the bench. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice slow, deliberate. "You seem to have a problem following the law. That's not something I take lightly in my courtroom." Mia's jaw tightened. She had explained, twice, that she hadn't even known the taillight was out. She'd apologized, offered to fix it immediately, but none of that mattered. Not to him. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was some kind of problem that needed to be dealt with. Then, in a voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, he said something that made everyone freeze. "I think a little discipline is in order. Since you don't seem to respect the rules, let's see how you handle a bit of physical responsibility." He smirked, then turned to the bailiff. "Make her drop and give me 20 push-ups." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. A few gasps. A nervous chuckle from someone in the back, as if they thought maybe, just maybe, this was a joke. But Mia knew better. The look in Judge Calloway's eyes told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't about justice. It wasn't about teaching a lesson. It was about power, about humiliation, and about something uglier than that. Something that had been happening to people like her for far too long. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Did he really just order a pregnant woman to do push-ups in front of a room full of people? Was this happening? Her hands instinctively went to her stomach. The baby inside her kicked, as if sensing her distress. "Your Honor," Mia started, keeping her voice even, though her heart pounded. You don't think, the judge interrupted with a dry chuckle. "That much is clear." He motioned to the bailiff again. "She follows my orders, or she spends the night in a cell. It's her choice." Mia's pulse pounded in her ears. The room blurred for a moment, the edges of her vision hazy. She could feel the stares, hear the whispered conversations happening around her. The bailiff stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter," he said in a low voice. "Please." Mia took a slow breath, steadying herself. She knew she was outnumbered, knew that fighting back would only make things worse. But what the judge didn't know, what no one in this courtroom knew, was who Mia's husband was. Because right now, hundreds of miles away, Senator Jordan Carter was in a high-powered meeting, completely unaware of what was happening to his wife. But not for long. Mia's hands trembled as she stared at the cold, polished floor of the courtroom. She could feel every pair of eyes locked on her, waiting, some curious, some sympathetic, and some filled with the same silent indifference that had let things like this happen for generations. She took a breath, willing herself to stay calm. Her baby's soft kicks were a reminder. She wasn't just standing here for herself. The bailiff shifted, clearly uncomfortable. He wasn't used to this. No one was. There were punishments for minor offenses, sure. Fines, warnings, community, service. But this, for a pregnant woman, it wasn't justice. It was cruelty disguised as authority. Mia's heart pounded as she lowered herself down, her hands pressing against the hard, unforgiving floor. She knew she couldn't physically do it, not without hurting herself, not without risking her baby. And she knew the judge knew it too. That was the point. He wanted to see her struggle. He wanted to remind her who had the power, but Mia wasn't the type to break easily. She swallowed hard, her pride battling against the sharp pain in her back. She wouldn't let this man win. Then, just as she was about to make her move, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A breathless young man in a crisp suit rushed inside, gripping a phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He scanned the room, his eyes desperate, until they landed on Mia. He was one of her husband's aides, and that could only mean one thing. Jordan knew. Judge Calloway frowned, irritated by the interruption. "What is the meaning of this?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the room. The aide didn't hesitate. He strode forward, stopping just short of the bench. "Your Honor," he said, struggling to steady his breath. "We need to stop this proceeding. Right now." The judge scoffed. "Excuse me." The aide's jaw tightened. He lowered his voice, but not enough for the rest of the courtroom to miss what he said next. "Senator Carter is on his way." For the first time, the judge faltered. It was a subtle thing, barely noticeable. The flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the way his fingers twitched against the gavel. But Mia caught it. Jordan Carter wasn't just any senator. He was one of the most respected men in Washington, known for his fierce stance against injustice. A man who had built his career fighting for people exactly like Mia, people who had been silenced, mistreated, ignored. He was also a man who loved his wife more than anything in the world, and if he had found out about this, Judge Calloway's expression hardened. He wasn't going to back down. Not yet. He turned to Mia, his voice colder than before. "I don't care who your husband is," he said. "In my courtroom, everyone follows the same rules." Mia finally pushed herself up from the floor, her legs shaking. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching her break. A slow, tense silence filled the room. Then, another sound, the sound of heavy, purposeful footsteps in the hallway. The doors swung open again, this time revealing a tall, commanding figure in a dark suit. Jordan Carter. His presence alone changed the energy of the room. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to storm in with threats. The authority he carried was enough. His eyes locked onto Mia immediately, scanning her face, her body, making sure she was okay. But when he turned to the judge, there was no mistaking the fury behind his calm exterior. The judge leaned forward, feigning confidence. "Senator Carter," he said, his tone tight. "This is a legal proceeding. You have no jurisdiction here." Jordan took a slow step forward, his gaze unflinching. "What I have," he said, voice steady, "is a wife who is 8 months pregnant and being humiliated in a courtroom for no reason other than your own power trip." The judge scoffed. "She broke the law." A broken taillight. Jordan shot back. Something that could have been resolved with a simple fix-it ticket. Instead, you ordered her to do push-ups. A pregnant woman, in front of an entire courtroom. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" The room was so silent that even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed too loud. For the first time, Judge Calloway seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just another case. This wasn't just another person he could dismiss with a wave of his gavel. Mia watched as her husband stepped closer, his voice even but sharp as a knife. "I've already spoken with the Attorney General's office. They're looking into your record as we speak." The judge's face paled. Jordan didn't stop. "And from what I hear, this isn't the first time you've abused your authority. But I promise you, it will be the last." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Whispers. Gasps. The shift in power was undeniable. Judge Calloway opened his mouth, searching for words, for a way out, but there wasn't one. Not anymore. Jordan turned to the bailiff. "Take my wife home." The bailiff hesitated, then nodded, stepping toward Mia with an unspoken apology in his eyes. Mia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She reached for Jordan's hand, squeezing it as tightly as she could. She was safe. But this wasn't over, because men like Judge Calloway didn't just disappear, and Jordan Carter wasn't the type to let something like this go. Not when the fight for justice had only just begun. Mia sat in the back seat of the black SUV, her hands still trembling slightly as she stared out the window. The city lights blurred past, but her mind was elsewhere. Back in that courtroom, back on that cold floor, back to the moment she realized just how easily people like Judge Calloway could wield power over people like her. She took a slow, deep breath, pressing a hand against her belly. The baby was still, as if sensing the tension had finally passed. Jordan sat beside her, his jaw clenched, his mind clearly racing. She knew him well enough to recognize that look, the one that meant he wasn't done, that this wasn't over. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers, his grip warm and firm. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, even though she wasn't sure if that was the truth. The car turned a corner, and Mia suddenly felt the weight of everything that had just happened hit her all at once. "I don't want this to just go away, Jordan," she whispered. "He's going to do it again, to someone else." Jordan's gaze was steady, filled with something unshakable. "It's not going away," he assured her. "I made sure of that." Mia studied him, waiting for an explanation. Jordan exhaled, leaning back against the seat. "Before I got to the courthouse, I called a few people, the state ethics committee, the press. By tomorrow morning, everyone's going to know exactly what happened in that courtroom." He paused, his voice thick with quiet anger. "And by the end of the week, Calloway's going to wish he'd never picked up that gavel." Mia swallowed hard. The thought of their personal nightmare being dragged into the public eye made her uneasy. But she also knew this was bigger than just them. It wasn't just about one judge. It was about the system that allowed men like him to sit in power unchecked. If she had to be the face of this fight, then so be it. The next morning, Mia woke to the sound of her phone buzzing relentlessly. She groggily reached for it, but Jordan was already awake, scrolling through his own phone with a satisfied expression. "It's everywhere," he murmured, handing her the device. She sat up, her heart pounding as she read the headlines. "Pregnant. Woman forced to do push-ups in courtroom sparks national outrage. Senator's wife faces humiliation at hands of controversial judge. Calls for Judge Calloway's resignation grow after disturbing courtroom footage." Mia's breath caught in her throat. Someone must have recorded it. The entire country was seeing what had happened. Before she could react, Jordan's phone rang. He answered with a calm, unreadable expression. "Yes?" A pause, then a slow, knowing nod. "I see." Another pause. "No, I won't accept an apology behind closed doors. He needs to step down." Mia watched him, her fingers tightening around the blanket. Jordan hung up, exhaling. "That was the governor's office," he said. "Calloway's been placed Under investigation. They're already discussing a suspension. His career is as good as over. Mia let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. It wasn't just about Calloway. Not really. It was about making sure no other woman had to stand where she had stood, humiliated and powerless, while a man in a robe decided to treat her dignity like a joke. Jordan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You changed something. Today," he murmured. "You made sure people paid attention." Mia closed her eyes for a moment, letting those words settle. The fight wasn't over. But today, justice had won.